welcome to Terry Boardman with Apocalypse Now. Terry is a researcher, author, lecturer and translator. He runs all the W's 3man.org, which features on China, Japan, East-West issues, New World Order and lots more. Tonight Terry picks through the bones of first Richard III, who somebody dug up, and then the London Olympics, Hillsborough Report, Tudors, and our relationships with the warlike and corrupt USA and EU, with a Pope thrown in for good measure. Now, Terry's first book, Mapping the Millennium, Behind the Plans of the New World Order, is going to be shortly reprinted. So there we go, and it'll be in about a month. His second book is Caspar Hauser, the poor young lad that was treated absolutely abysmally just because of his birth. So please welcome Terry Boardman.
To switch this thing on first. Right. Is that okay? Can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Good. If for any reason my voice drops a little, just give us a shout. So thank you very much, Rob. It's very nice to be with you all again here in St Anne's. For those of you who don't know me, I'm based in Stourbridge in the West Midlands. I've been living there since 1984, but originally I'm from Chester. This title, Apocalypse Now, of course, don't think you're always going to start talking about 2013 in the same way people were talking about 2012. The title Apocalypse is simply because apocalypse means revelation. The word means revelation. And certainly, if 2012 meant anything, and it certainly didn't, as we all saw, mean the end of the world, I gave a talk on that subject here, it did turn out to be a year of revelations, did it not? And it's that I'm going to be talking about today, particularly revelations for Britain. Richard III, I can well imagine you thinking, well, you know, what does Richard III got to do with me? I mean, you. 500 odd years ago. But, you know, if you ask if any of you are Catholics or have been through Catholicism, or if any of you have been through a particular Protestant stream, then you ask yourself, well, what has Henry VIII got to do with me? Well, it has a lot to do with you. Because without that individual, Britain wouldn't have become what it became as a Protestant church, Protestant country. And it's quite clear, as we saw with the death of Margaret Thatcher recently at the funeral, whatever you thought of Margaret Thatcher, it's obvious that an individual can make a big difference in the life of a nation. So, Richard III, the mystery or the revelation of Richard III, the thing that got me interested in him, in this context, is the timing with which this particular revelation occurred. So, if we just have a look at what happened last year, the dig in Leicester was announced in June, and then we had the London Olympics. Before that, of course, we'd had the revelation to the world, if you will, of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. So again, a big year already by the beginning of the Olympics for Britain. Then the end of the London Olympics came on the 12th of August. Just by the by, Richard III was originally killed at the Battle of Bosworth on the 22nd of August, 1485. And then on the 25th of August, we had the beginning of the dig in Leicester. 29th to the 9th of September, we had the Paralympic Games. And then came, on the 4th of September, the announcement of the discovery of some bones. It wasn't yet totally confirmed what these bones were, but they were hoping that they would indeed be the bones of Richard. Then, on the 12th of September, after this great extravaganza of the Olympics, and you remember Cameron, not least, amongst many other people, were giving us all a great national pat on the back, saying, didn't we do well in the Olympics? And then we saw how on the 12th of September, there he is, in the House of Commons, apologising to the nation on behalf of the establishment, following the publication of the Independent Power Report into the Hillsborough disaster of 1989 because of the corruption, because of the shocking events in which the local police, local politicians were involved in that tragedy. And you remember the way that the people of Liverpool were besmirched and so on. So there is Cameron having to make this apology very soon after the hullabaloo over the Olympic Games. And in that process, in the background, we have this dig going on that these bones may be Richard's. And then, on the 20th of September, it was announced that Sir James Wilson Vincent Saville, OBE KCSG, his headstone was unveiled for his rather grandiose grave there. And on the 28th of September was the announcement of the ITV programme, Exposure, about him. And then that was broadcast on the 3rd of October, which then led almost immediately to the police investigation. And that went on then through the autumn, the dig continued, and then of course we had the end of the world on the 21st of December, congratulations, we're all still here. And then finally, as you know, on the 4th of February this year, the bones were in fact confirmed as those of Richard III. So, you know, we could say that it's so interesting that it's this king, in this whole process of looking back at our history, the Queen's Jubilee, and then obviously, you think of the historical aspects of the Jubilee, of the Olympics ceremonial. I'm sure most of us watched that. Very much of a retrospective of British history. A certain view of history was presented to us. And of course, history in itself is fascinating, and I've been fascinated by it since I was a child. And it's interesting in itself to try to understand what the people of the past were like. But it's also interesting for us today, because those who interpret history to us often then try to tell us what this history means for our present and our future. And I'm sure some of you are aware or know of a quote which I often like to give from the book 1984 by George Orwell. Those who control the past control the future. Those who control the present control the past. So if you've got a certain interpretation of the past, and then you interpret your country's development from now on into the future, in terms of that interpretation of the past, we can see then that how we understand the past is very important, not least for politicians and the stories they try to give to us. So in that context of these various revelations, these apocalypses, if you will, these shocks, because let's face it, we were, in a sense, the whole nation was conned by Jimmy Saville, everybody from the royal family right down to, you know, anybody at our ordinary citizen level. Yeah? Jimmy Saville managed to do that over a period of some 4 decades, right in front of the nation's cameras, right in the public eye. So that was a shock. The Hillsborough event was a shock. Some people even experienced some aspects of the Olympics as a shock. But in this context, it's interesting that it was this particular king who suddenly shows up. And we all know that because of Shakespeare's play, this particular king has been branded as one of our nation's worst villains. I'm not in this talk going to be particularly going into this question of, you know, was he or wasn't he? That's not where my focus is, but you'll see where that is in a moment. But certainly we have been told many times that Richard III was, as it were, deformed in spirit as well as in body. And there's been an ongoing debate about him since at least the 1920s. Now, irrespective of who it was who actually did away with the princes in the Tower in the summer of 1483, the princes were 12 and 9 years old. They were the sons of Richard's brother, Edward IV, and therefore Richard's own nephews. Irrespective of that, and there are four possible candidates as to who might have done away with them, there is this question, why? Why is this king turned up at this time? And I think the answer to these two questions is a single, can be put in a single sentence, and that is historical turning point. In the sense of a symptom, there's a certain symptom, a historical symptom, something that happened on the surface of history, points to something that is much deeper, happening much deeper in the nation's story. Just like a certain event in your own biography might point to something which is much more fundamental in your own life story. Now, what's reappeared in Richard's case is just his bones. Nothing he wrote, nothing of his clothes, nothing which gives us any indication of the spirit of the man internally, but just his dry mineral bones. The most dead part of the human being. And it's this that the archaeologists and the forensic scientists have been busying themselves with. And at least they found that there was something to Shakespeare's portrayal of the man in terms of the fact that although he was not a hunchback, that he must have probably walked with a certain lilt, a certain uneven walk, because of the lateral curvature of his spine. All spines, when you look at them from the side, in a normal human skeleton, have a gentle S curve looked at from the side, but in Richard's case, he had a lateral S curve as well. So he had a double S curve. This is a condition known as scoliosis. Now, since the 15th century, it's been this bony, mineral aspect of earthly life that our physical, natural sciences have been particularly concerned with. That's the part of our life that, for example, physicists look into, geologists, the part that is most easily quantified, calculated, measured, totally controlled. And the thought forms and the accompanying feelings that go with this kind of science, which looks into this aspect of reality, as opposed to, for example, the life sciences, biology and so on, and the coldness, the objectification, the removal of the inside of the human soul and spirit, the way that was put aside from natural science from the 17th century onwards. This is what the hard sciences have been focusing on, and this has been applied from them to the other sciences. So the influence of this kind of way of looking at the human being and the natural world has gone on then into the life sciences and also into the social sciences, sometimes with very dubious results. But there's a deep-rooted necessity for this, and humanity, we could say, has been exploring various aspects of reality over the centuries and millennia. If we go back, say, 2,000 years, we would find that our ancestors, I would suggest, had far more real insight into the living nature of what we now call the biosphere, the world of plants and animals, than we do today. They could somehow see directly into the nature of butterflies and hawks and primulas and carnations and plants and corn and wheat and so on, in ways that we can't do anymore. But what they didn't do so much was to dig down deep into the interior of the earth and really study look into, right inside the mineral aspect of reality. And that's what we've been doing since the 17th century, particularly with the Industrial Revolution. But with these different kinds, so in that sense, humanity has gone right down into that level of reality, and now even the subatomic. But if we go too far in that particular direction, then we become unbalanced. And I think we can say that from the last 100 years, we've definitely become unbalanced in that sense, in the direction of what some people have dubbed as a culture of death or deathliness, stasis. Our characteristic modern music today, for example, is rock music, which emphasizes the element of beat. And beat, as distinct from melody, rhythm, harmony, even rhythm, is the most dead part, the most dead musical phenomenon. Equally, today, of course, we have rap music, and rap basically is not really interested in melody. Rap tends to have a rather metric presentation of the words. So again, there's a certain, slight, I would say, deadening aspect to that. The words are often very interesting as poetry, but in the way that they're presented, I don't think it's as living or alive as song. Our politics, social and financial arrangements are ever more determined by quantifiers, feedback systems, abstractions of all kinds. Our food and water, as you know, are filled with all sorts of pesticides and additives. Our medicine, our medical care is given over to chemicals, abstract systems, numbers, and you're all familiar with these kind of things. And just as we're damaging our own bodies in these ways, we're also damaging the planet at the same time in our ecology. So for the last about 300 years, we could say, since the Industrial Revolution, the effect of this kind of science, which is focused on the exactitudes of the mineral world, is applied to the living world. Now, as the culture of rationalism and intellectuality and scientific objectivity spreads out in the 17th and 18th centuries, it had this effect of devaluing human feelings. Scientists were no longer interested in what lives inside you, or the relationship between what lives inside the human being and what's out there in the world. And this cool or even cold attitude of observation spreads then to other aspects of society. And at the same time, we see a changing happening in religion. So that in the 17th century, which is a time of great religious conflict, when people felt very passionately about religion, think of the English Civil War, for example, then we have a reaction against that in the mid-17th century, and then gradually for the next 100 years in the so-called Age of Enlightenment, you get this focus on rationality and intellectuality until we get a bizarre phenomenon in the 18th century where most of the young people, fashionable, wealthy people in Europe, right across Europe, are all walking around in about 1750 with white wigs on. It's kind of weird, yeah? That young 25-year-olds are wearing white wigs. If you're a fashionable young aristocrat in 1750. Why? Because white is the colour of, or silver, the silver heads, the grey heads, is the colour of wisdom, which comes with old age, or at least people thought. The brain, the mind, intellect, rationality. This was the important thing in that time. So a reaction against the religious passions of the 17th century. So these two developments, the hardening element of science on the one hand, the pushing out of the human feelings, and then also the cooling down of the religious temperament, you might say, that led to people treating each other with more inhumanity in the 18th century. The medieval fear of punishment for the sins in the afterlife had receded, especially among educated people. So, and yet along with these kind of developments, this coldness, paradoxically went an affirmation of the personality, a growth of individual freedom, a demand for personal liberty, starting first of all in the area of religion. I want to worship God in my own way and not how the Pope tells me to, or even the King tells me to. Then that from the religious world, that spreads into politics. And from politics also it spreads into economics. So by the time we get into the 18th century with Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, you have the assertion, I must be free to start my own business, and I must be free to make my own profits, and I must be free to make as many products as I want, and to lay off as many workers as I want, and to exploit as many workers